This incredibly cool man casually waves his hand, and the missiles around him launch like arrows from a bow. They quickly split into multiple warheads mid-air, zeroing in on their target with deadly accuracy. These weapons, far more advanced than the Dongfeng missiles, were crafted by none other than Tony Stark. However, little did he know, it was his own weapons that would nearly cost him his life. After showcasing the power of his creations, Tony was on his way home when a missile suddenly struck. Despite the best efforts of his bodyguards, the vehicle Tony was in was obliterated, and he had no choice but to escape, taking cover behind a rock. He pulled out his phone to call for help, but just then, another missile landed right at his feet. To his horror, he realized that it was one of his own company's products. Escape was impossible now. The blast threw him through the air, and for someone who had been hit by missiles more times than he could count, this was as good as a death sentence. Blood oozed from his clothes. Thankfully, he had been wearing a specially designed suit of armor, which saved his life. As he slipped in and out of consciousness, he felt someone cutting into his side. The pain was excruciating. Then, he blacked out. When Tony regained consciousness, he found himself trapped in a dimly lit cave. There was an unfamiliar man beside him, and despite his agony, Tony managed to pull the breathing tube out of his chest. His body felt stiff from lying in bed for so long. He tried to drink some water, but the cup slipped from his hands. When he tried to stand, it felt as though someone was pulling him back. He turned around and saw that a battery was attached to his chest by a wire. Panicking, he tore off the bandages and discovered that a magnetic ring had been placed around his chest. The doctor explained that the magnet was there to pull metal fragments from the wounds, and while most had been removed, some smaller pieces couldn't be taken out. If those fragments moved into his heart, it would be fatal. The magnet was acting as a protective device to prevent that from happening. The catch? Tony would have to wear the battery forever. Before Tony could fully grasp the situation, a group of armed terrorists barged in, demanding that he build weapons for them. If these weapons fell into their hands, it would bring chaos to the world. The terrorists threatened him with immense physical torture, but worse than that, they subjected him to psychological torment. They took him outside the cave and showed him their stockpile of missiles.
Evry Missile bore the Stark Industries logo.
Tony was shocked and confused. How had his company's weapons ended up in the hands of these people? The terrorist leader hoped Tony would make even more advanced weapons for them. He promised that Tony would be freed once the job was done and that he could use whatever materials he needed. Tony knew the man's promises were empty, but he played along, already forming an escape plan in his mind. Since they provided him with all the resources he needed, he wasn't about to waste them. The first thing he did was extract the targeting elements from his own missiles and use them to build a small reactor to replace the magnet on his chest. He gathered all the palladium, melted it at high temperatures, and poured it into a mold. This produced a highly purified palladium ring. Then, he added a permanent magnet and carefully welded copper wires onto it. In doing so, he created a small reactor to power his chest. With his new reactor in place, the next step was to escape, but there was a major obstacle, the constant surveillance from the terrorists. To avoid being caught, Tony divided the blueprints for his suit into 6 parts and assembled the Iron Man Mark I suit, which was his only chance to break free. The terrorists thought Tony was diligently working, unaware that he was secretly assembling his suit. Within days, he had completed the parts of the suit, and soon, he was testing the leg components. The leader of the terrorists burst into the cave, and after a brief search with no results, he decided to make an example of Tony. He picked up a scalding hot iron ball and threatened to burn the doctor's tongue if Tony didn't reveal what he was working on. The doctor remained calm, as if he had expected this. But just then, Tony spoke up, offering to complete the missile delivery by tomorrow in exchange for the doctor's safety. Satisfied, the leader left, and that night, Tony and the doctor hurriedly completed the Mark I suit. By the time the leader checked the surveillance cameras, Tony had already disappeared. The leader ordered his men to investigate, but when they opened the door, the bombs Tony had placed earlier exploded, killing them instantly. Meanwhile, Tony was now inside the Mark I armor. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to get him out of there. With the suit powered up, he punched through a terrorist and began taking down the others with ease, eliminating them one by one. Tony's main concern was the doctor, but just as he arrived, the terrorist leader ambushed him. An RPG shot toward Tony, but he skillfully dodged it and retaliated, taking down the leader. Sadly, the doctor was gravely injured, and Tony desperately pleaded for him to hold on. The doctor, however, smiled and refused to accept his help. In a rage, Tony stormed out of the cave and faced the remaining terrorists, unleashing flamethrowers and decimating them. The explosions destroyed their weapons cache, and with his revenge complete, Tony took off in the suit. But the small reactor couldn't support the weight of the Mark I suit, and Tony crashed in a desert, barely surviving. Luckily, His friend Rhodey arrived just in time to find him. Back at his base, Tony realized that the weapons he had created to protect humanity were instead fueling wars. This went against everything he had once believed, and so he decided to announce the closure of Stark Industries' weapons division. The announcement caused an uproar. Obadiah, a shareholder, angrily questioned Tony's decision. "We're a weapons manufacturer. What are we supposed to do now, make kimchi?" But Tony was resolute, having learned from his experiences that saving the world was his true mission. However, his heart wasn't strong enough. He needed a new, more powerful one. Tony's new reactor could generate 10 billion joules of energy per second, equivalent to the output of a nuclear power plant over the course of a year. The upgrade was risky. One small mistake could reduce him to ashes. Fortunately, with Pepper's help, Tony successfully completed the upgrade. He had the old reactor destroyed, but Pepper, instead of disposing of it, turned it into a gift for Tony, a gift that would save his life later on. Meanwhile, Tony and JRVIS worked on the Mark II suit. Tony reworked the design of the Mark I, removing unnecessary parts. Soon, the legs of the suit were complete, and in the first test, Tony was able to fly up to a high wall. He realized that the suit needed further adjustments to achieve full flight capabilities, including power boosts to the arms and more precise balance. After numerous tweaks, Tony managed to fly effortlessly, and the Mark II suit began to take shape. Soon, the Mark II was ready. JRVIS helped Tony suit up, and with a push of the thrusters, Tony soared through the sky. His suit's performance exceeded all expectations. But when he pushed the limits, trying to fly to 20,000 meters, the suit began to freeze, and the system started shutting down. Only Tony's quick thinking and manual activation of the anti-icing system saved him from plummeting to his death. Back at the base, Tony realized that the Mark II was too heavy. He decided to upgrade to a lightweight titanium alloy, which not only reduced the suit's weight but also strengthened its exterior, solving the high-altitude issues. While Tony was busy upgrading the suit, he was shocked to see on the news that his company was hosting a charity event, but as the CEO, he wasn't even invited. After designing the Mark III, he handed over the assembly to JRVIS and made his way to the event, only to learn that he had been ousted from his own company. Things only got worse when it was revealed that the terrorist group was using Stark Industries weapons again. Tony realized there was a traitor in his company, Obadiah, who had secretly been working with the terrorists. Tony, furious over the betrayal, confronted his old partner. Obadiah admitted his motives, and it became clear that Tony could no longer count on anyone in his company. As Obadiah's forces launched another attack, Tony suited up in the Mark III. A battle ensued with high-tech weapons, but it was clear that Obadiah's suit was no match for Tony's. With a final act of brilliance, Tony launched a full counterattack. The destruction left Obadiah's forces decimated and the villain himself destroyed in the fallout. After all the chaos, Tony stood before the cameras at a press conference, facing questions from the media. He calmly responded, delivering one of the most iconic lines ever, "I am Iron Man."